Welcome. You have reached review time with Imperial, and today's review will be Ant-Man and the Wasp 3 Quantumania. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Let's get into it. So let's go over the cast. So of course we got Paul Rudd plays as Ant-Man slash Scott Lang. Evangeline Lilly plays as Hope Van Dyne as the Wasp. Of course, we know that Evangeline Lilly, she originated from the hit series Lost that was on ABC. Then we got Jonathan Majors plays as Kane the Conqueror. You know, he's been preparing in a lot of movies lately, so he's getting his just due. Catherine Newton plays as Cassie Lang. Michelle Pfeiffer plays as Janet Van Dyne. William Jackson Harper plays as Quaz. Katie M. O'Brien plays as Jantara. And then you have Michael Douglas plays as Dr. Hank Pym. And then Bill Murray plays as Lord Kryler. So that's pretty much the bulk of the cast that you really need to pay attention to. So Marvel always does a good job that characters that you might not, follow too much, make their movies interesting. So, of course, that's why it's a part 3 of Ant-Man and the Wasp. So, as we all know that Janet Penn, she came out of the quantum realm. We also know Scott, when he was in there, when he was in that truck, and he was down there. That's how the Avengers Endgame and a role that he plays. If you've been following the storyline, so the movie starts off with Scott pretty much walking, narrating his story. He made a book. His wife Hope, she has took back over the pen company, and she's been a philanthropist. She's been giving back to the world using science and technology to help. Meanwhile, Cassie is becoming like a freedom fighter in a sense. So she's protesting for the homeless and stuff like that. So Scott was given a reading for his book, and he got a phone call from the police station. Cassie was in jail. So when Cassie's getting signed out of jail, the cop is asking her pretty much, "Where's the cop car? Where's the cop car?" And she dug the cop car out of her bag, and basically she took the device to shrink the cop car. So of course Scott is telling her like she shouldn't use that device. It can get in the wrong hands, and she's pretty much telling him, "I'm not a little kid. I know how to handle myself." And he's basically lecturing her, but she's not trying to hear. Hope is trying to tell him to pause break, but he's not. But they got this relationship where she wants to do more with their technology. Scott been through a lot, so he's not trying to get his daughter mixed up everything that he was doing with the Avengers and everything. But she's basically saying, even though you're not doing stuff with the Avengers, the world still needs help. So you should be helping. So nevertheless, they make it back to the family house, and they're all having dinner. Scott doesn't feel like nobody's listening to him, but nor did he know that pretty much that they've been using Cassie, preparing her behind his back. So he's kind of a little upset at that, but he finds out that Cassie's been dealing with the technology, and the mom, Janet, she didn't pretty much know either. But Cassie built a device that can contact with the quantum realm. And so once Janet found out, she was like, turn it off. Like, they like, why? And Hope was trying to get her mom to talk to her about her time during in the quantum realm, but she never would talk about it. So when she found out the device was making communication, she slammed on the device, and it shut off at first. And they was like, well, tell us why. And she still wouldn't tell them. And then it turned back on, and then it sucked them all in to the quantum realm along with ants and everybody else. So they arrived in the quantum realm, and Hope, Hank, and Janet end up in one section of the quantum realm, and Cassie and Scott land in another part of the quantum realm. And so you got to experience the people that were in the quantum realm, and pretty much they had Cassie and Scott drink this juice so that they can talk to him, but they weren't really a threat. They were just like, you're outsiders, and he took our land from us and everything. They're not saying who he is at the time. So when Scott made the mention of the name Janet, they all looked at him funny. Meanwhile, when it went to Janet, Hank, and Hope, she was telling them, she meaning Janet was telling them they need to chill. So she was very familiar with the area. So they're wondering, like, what are you not telling us? So this group came upon them, and Janet showed her fighting skills, and then they end up befriending her, gave her a ride on some little animal thing. She said, we gotta reach out to somebody so we can get some information on pretty much where Cassie and Scott is. So they get to this place that's like a lounge. So this is where MCU's version, I mean, you could say the Galaxy, the Garden was MCU's version of like Star Wars, but to me this really was like a scene straight out of Star Wars if you into Star Wars. But nevertheless, you get into here, she goes there, they reach out to Krylar. He comes in, you find out that him and Janet used to date, and then Hank is always looking funny, like, and she pretty much saying, look, man, I was down here 30 years, I had needs. And then Hope is looking at her like, Mom, for real? So nevertheless, Krylar tells her he knows where Scott and Cassie is, and pretty much he works for Kang the Conqueror now. And Janet looks wary. So Kang the Conqueror made him a lord. So they pretty much fought their way out. They meaning Janet, Hank, and Hope fought their way out. Hank took over the ship. Now, what you were seeing, Hank was getting like these signs of communication in his ear microphone, but he's thinking it was Scott. But you're not really paying attention to it at the time. So that'll come back later in the film. So as they drove off in a little spaceship, Janet began to tell Hope and Hank what happened. And when she was back on the quantum realm many years ago, she ran into Kang. And she used the Pentech to help this orb that charged and energized Kang the Conqueror's ship. And this is the ship he was exiled into this quantum realm. And it uses, if he gets a hold of that ship, he could go back and fight. And gives him his strength back so he won't be exiled. So when she hooked it up and connected it to the ship, she just wanted to get home and get back to her daughter. She's seen all the visions of everything he experienced when who he was. So of course we seen Kang the Conqueror. He debuted for the MCU in the Loki TV series on Disney Plus. So we've seen that, and we've just seen the realm of him. This is giving more of his storyline. And she basically stated, like, you weren't no good, and you was destroying worlds and everything like that. And he was just like, pretty much, listen, don't worry about that. I'm going to send you back to your daughter. So she took the pen technology, put it over the orb, and threw it. And what it did was it blew the orb up, and it banished him where he couldn't leave now. So she ran off, and for years she was fighting with him with the other groups. Now when he in return did, since he couldn't leave, he evolved with the technology that was down there, and he got stronger, and he built the whole empire down in the quantum realm. So that was Janet telling her side of the story. Now she was headed to try to get to where the orb is. Meanwhile, you had Cassie and Scott who were with the other group. And so what Kang did, he sent his Modoff. And Modoff was like a comic relief for the for the movie because um uh Modoc. I said Modoff. It's Modoc. So in Ant-Man and the Wasp, Ant-Man 1. So the Ant-Man and the Wasp was 2. So Ant-Man, the very first one, there was a bee that was the main villain. So that guy got kicked into the quantum realm, and all was left of him and it was his head. So Kang the Conqueror took him and made him Modoc. And so he sent Modoc out to get Cassie and Scott. And so Modoc showed up, and when he showed up, he spoke to Scott, and Scott looking like, well, who you? And so he opened up it was just his head in this, weird looking body thing. Like from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Crane the Brain, that if you've been watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles back in the day. So something looking like that. Just his head and his arms was technology, just a big head. And he was pretty much saying what Kane did for him, and now he just could destroy people. So it just was a comic relief on everything. So nevertheless, he took Cassie and Scott in to their prison. Kane came out pretty much explaining to who he was and told Scott he needed him to go into the orb and shrink it so that he could use it again. So the orb was just blown up. He can't go in there because he can't shrink tiny enough to go in there to the orb. So Scott was like, pretty much no, but Kane started using his powers to kill Cassie. And so he told Scott pretty much, if you do it, I'll let your daughter live. So Scott went and dived into the orb pretty much to shrink it. Now, when you go into the orb, the guy's name was Dylan from Ant-Man 1. So Dylan told him, which is MODOK, told him on the microphone pretty much, when you go in there, you're going to see like the possibilities of yourself. So all these different Scotts start popping up. And one version of him was the Baskin and Robbins Scott. So he was in there and he started to fail to get to the orb. Meanwhile, at this point, Hope, Hank, and Janet is on their way to get into the orb. And so Hope jumped out and she turned into the Wasp so she could go in and help Scott. And when they both joined together, when Scott almost gave up, they shot the orb and then strunk it. When they strunk it back to size, Janet pretty much was like, all right, we need to go. And he like, no, he got Cassie, so I got to give him this. And so at that time, Kane came down, pretty much told Scott, we had a deal, and you need to hand that over to me. And he basically was telling him, like, you need to give it to me. I'm going to take it from you. So nevertheless, what happened was they got to fighting, and he basically smacked Hope and Scott over while they turned into the little people, and Hank flew off somewhere else. So Kane took Janet with him back on the ship, and now he got the orb back. So now he get ready to make his way to finish his plan. So now what you have is Scott and Hope. They need to devise a plan to get Cassie back. Meanwhile, when Hank got blown somewhere, he was found by his aunts. So when the communication, when I said it was coming back, his aunts was trying to communicate with him. So what was taking place is his aunts that went through the quantum realm as well, time sped for them. So every day pretty much totaled to like, every day that went by totaled to like 1,000 days for them. So they advanced so fast that they advanced the whole colony, and they built technology to go against Cain. So now Hank had his aunts, and he comes back and joins the war and fight. So what takes place from here, all heck break loose. Scott pretty much say, I gotta help. So he turned into the big ant man, and just went through fighting, kicking over buildings, causing disturbance to Kane after he pit his full army against Scott. Meanwhile, what took place from there, Cassie got free, and she started the people that was captured, which was it was one main warrior. What was her name? I can't think of it right now. Oh, Jatara. So she was one main warrior. She was leading the rebellion, and she broke her out, and pretty much she helped her, and she pretty much said, you gotta get a message to the people so they can step up and fight. So Kane was talking to all his group, and it's like hologram, and they interfered in the technology, and Cassie pretty much got up and told the people, like, you need to step up and fight. Don't give up. We at the tower, and we, basically taking over. And so while the war was going on, all the people that was in the area stood up and fighting. They came to help. So when they started making disruption and they stopped the orb from powering the ship, Kane came down, and he just started getting busy and going maniac and beating everybody up. And then that's when Hank showed up. Hank showed up and with all his aunts, and then they start really just taking over. There's too many of them. They just killed Kane's group and pretty much took him away, and he disappeared for a little bit. Meanwhile, Janet was like, I could get us back to Earth, and she start doing the technology to get back to Earth. And so it opened up a ramp for them to walk through. So they all got walking through. Hank, Janet, and Cassie, and then Hope went in. Right when Scott was ready to go through, Kane came out and shot Scott, and then his thing got fried. And of course, they start fighting, and they were, Kane was of course beating Scott up pretty bad. And then right when Kane was about to finish Scott off, Hope came back, and then she started shooting Kane, and then they together beat Kang up, and he got fried through this another ram. Meanwhile, what happened with them, they blew their ram up, and so they pretty much was looking at the rebellion happen. All the people that was enslaved are running from Kang and his group now. They took over, they got their place. Meanwhile, back at Earth, Cassie was rebuilding her technology to open the communication back up for the realm. And then it shows the realm open back up. So that pretty much ends the movie. However, it shows Scott looking like this is too good to be true. Like, he did mention if he didn't get loose, something big was gonna come. And so he's like, I'm just overthinking. So Scott just kept saying something's not right. So they was at a fake birthday party for Cassie, and he's up there eating cake, and the cake wasn't that good, and he just couldn't get past something's missing. So it went off. So we end up taking it. There is 2 post-credit scenes. So the first post-credit scene, what it shows is, if you remember from Loki series, when Kane was mentioning, he had so many different, in the multiverse, he had so many different variants. That was Kane of this, Kang of this, Kang of this. So all these variants were linking up, and they were summoned, and it was 3 main variants. And basically they said they got to come together to show up on Earth to fight a war. The reason why they feel as though if one of their Kangs can be killed by somebody from Earth, they got to eliminate that threat before the rest of them get killed. So it shows them with all their variants ready for war. That was the first post credit scene. The second one was it shows with Loki. Now the setting's probably like 1918, 1920, 1910, somewhere around there. It's like way back in the day, and it's showing a variant of King talking, and it's Loki looking, and he's pretty much like, "Hey, um, he's the threat." And it's Owen Wilson's character. I forgot what his name was from the Loki series. Whatever Owen Wilson's character is, I think his name was Morpheus or something like that. Um, I think it's Morpheus, whatever. But nevertheless, his character was there with Loki, and remember they became friends in the Loki series. He was like, "Oh man, he looks harmless," and Loki pretty much was like, "Nah, he's a threat." And it went off. So two post credit season scenes. Overall, it was a good movie. That's my review. It pushes the story forward. Of course, we after this one we got what's up next is Guardian of the Galaxy. I think that's the last one for Guardian of the Galaxy. I think this is gonna be the last one for Ant-Man and the Wasp too, because you know we got to get for the get ready gear for the Secret Wars. So, out of my 4-star rating system, I'm gonna give this movie 3 stars out of 4. It pushes the story forward. It was a good story. And of course, you know, I'm a novice to this whole comic book world, but I give it to you from my point of view. And of course, you could do your own research, and the people that's really deep in the comics, they'll be able to break it down even more. But this is just my version of the review. Subscribe to the channel, like the video. Till next time.